Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of Corel Gallane. And in Corel Gallane, it's still Friday because I didn't get to actually record yesterday's video yesterday, so please ignore that. Imagine it's Friday, you have the entirety of your weekend before you, and things are looking up. So let's wrap up Fall of Light Book 2, shall we? Cheers. So yeah, I finished Fall of Light Book 2 yesterday. I was rather late in the evening, and there was a lot to digest for me, so I figured I'd just, don't do it at that point. So I'm here now. So let's look at stuff that happens in Book 2 in chapters 15 and 16. 15 deals with the fate of the Hust Legion, or the now kind of returning Hust Legion, and chapter 16 deals with events at House Kraken. Not Kraken, Draken. Gods. That's all we need. Tentacles in there. No. With House Dragons. So let's look at both of those in a while. So we begin with Hus General talking to Galabaris, or the other way around, about dissolution. And the idea of industry, heavy industry, and the problems that it may bring. And this is something that I feel is interesting to look at. The idea that kind of Hust puts out there, among other ideas, that in a way, and this is something that we have in our world as well, at least in some countries, the idea is that like heavy industry acquires like, or is reason in itself to pursue. It's like we build machines, and why do we do that? It's like because we can, and that's enough reason to do it. So we devour parts of our planet, and once again, environmental destruction is a huge topic in these books all the time. Yeah, we do that because we can, and that's sometimes motivation enough. In this regard, it's obviously Hostanrold and his forges, and he forges iron in all these ways because he's able to. And making swords is reason enough, and you don't even think about what happens with those swords afterwards, because, like, technically at the time when he was doing all this stuff after the war, right? Like before the Civil War, the Hust forges were still turning out swords and armor for the Hust Legion, building it up more and more and more. The reason, like, why do we need all of those swords and weapons? And the reasons, like, maybe we don't, but making them has become like a thing in itself. And the costs we pay for that are something that we rarely think about until it's way too late. Which we see there, the environmental costs for heavy industry are huge. Most of the forests around there are burned, the coal sucks, the iron is tapped out, the human costs from all of the mining pits and everything are immense. And then you have the idea that you have all these weapons lying around. What happens to weapons? Like, they'll get used. And the sad truth about weapons is they're used to hurt people. That's kind of what they're used, what what they're made for. So that's certainly something that we should look at. That a lot of times we as humans, because we are clever people. By clever, I don't mean like intelligent. I mean we delight in our own cleverness, and it's something that we see in science, that we see in, like, once again, in industry, and even oftentimes in, like, our private lives. Like, we do things because we figured out how to do them, and we are so happy about the fact that we found out how to do them that we just keep doing them. It's like we're so busy working on them that we never, like, actually ask the question of, like, should we actually? And that's certainly something that has harmed us as a people a lot, like as a species a lot, and the planet around us. Which, yeah, something to be looked at and be remembered at, and it kind of plays into, on the other hand, what we see in, like, chapter 16, when Anomander Rake and Kaladin Brood and Ivis is in that discussion as well, I think. Talk about, yeah, Ivis is in that discussion as well. Talk about that the nature, that goddess of nature of the earth, or like a dream of Burn, the sleeping goddess, which is still like a weird thing that's going on there. But anyway, the point that if you see nature in general as sentient, or at least as alive, or whatever, more than just like plant stuff and animal stuff that we can just like consume at will. If you take the idea that the complex interplay between all these different life forms on a planet has an emergent quality, then there's something larger around that. And if you ascribe some form of sentience to it, wouldn't you like think that maybe nature is really pissed at us for doing all that shit? Now, this is obviously speculative when you look at our planet. I mean, I know there's like stuff like the Gaia hypothesis and stuff like that, but I'm not going to go into the details of that right now. The point is, if, like with the Malazan universe, or in this case, the Carcanas universe, that's fantasy, right? That's a fantasy world where that sentience exists. So yeah, of course they're pissed. Nature is pissed with the Teist because the Teist fucked nature over in a brutal way. So, and we have that, like, would you do, like when we see like what we do, what the Teist do to the to nature is hurt it. And the question is like, what do we do when we are hurt? What we do when we are hurt is we lash out. A lot of us do, most of the time. Not always, but a lot of people, a lot of hurt creatures lash out. So that's what nature does. And how does nature do that? Maybe by driving people insane and doing dumb shit. Which, and this is like the large leap that we can take here, right? Is that the entire civil war in Corel Galen is not only a result of like how civilization works, but also a result of the environmental destruction the Teist have like visited on their part of the world, right? And that has driven the Teist more and more insane. Now you can look at it and like ask the question: is the inevitable development of civilization already an expression of that insanity, or is it not? I'm not quite at the point where I want to decide on that one, but it's certainly a thought to keep in mind, right? And it's kind of enforced by the fact that the Jaghut, under Gathas, actually went and consciously turned away from that path and went back into whatever it is Jaghut do, which is sit at home and be idiosyncratic, I guess, in their own ways. Now, obviously, Jaghut have certain resources that the Teist, until the birth of magic, didn't have, which helps them immensely with keeping fed and living comfortable lives, because that's like the other things, right? The idea of living in step with nature, or whatever you want to call it, the idea of like having that nice like as romantic as it sounds, it is mostly not. Barbaric life, or like all of that, leaves a lot to be desired, especially for people who have already tasted the amenities of society, right, of civilization. So, and the Jaghut have not gone back to wandering as hunter-gatherers alone, or in like groups of 2 or 3 through the forest, living together with nature and only taking what they need and so forth. No, they have stayed in their towers somewhere in the middle of nowhere and used their magic to live pretty nice lives, all things considered. So that's something that we should not forget. This is like the total destruction of civilization, the abandonment of civilization as such, is not an option for everyone, unfortunately. Or fortunately, obviously, because I kind of like a civilized life. Because only in a civilized life I can actually, rail against civilization. It really helps. Anyway, we have that discussion and the idea of freedom being like the only freedom within that structure that General talks about is in what we can abandon, what we can throw away. That and in being abandoned, there's some freedom in there. Just not a good one. But then again, the idea is is freedom as such an ultimate virtue or an ultimate benefit or goal? Because freedom, like absolute freedom, doesn't really work for most people because unless you live completely alone. So that's the question. The freedom that comes, well, the liberation that comes with having all bridges burned and being abandoned. There is that freedom in there, certainly. It's the kind of freedom that you have if you have lived with I don't know if you if you've ever ended a relationship because it was just over at that point, and there comes a feeling of liberation after that for everyone involved. I feel whether it's you who initiates that or the other person, that doesn't matter. Once it's over, you're out there, abandoned. There's freedom in that, of course. Anyway, and just one thing. Another thing that I found really interesting was the structure of chapter 15, where we have that discussion and then we go all the way, through the that gallery with all the different stages of the Hust industrial revolution in a way. And once we come to the empty place where the sword was, and there's obviously a reason for the fact that this is a symbolic reason for the fact that this is an empty niche for it, but also that's sort of the point where we get the flashback to all the events at the Hust camp with Prazak and Dathanar showing up for the first time and doing their Prazak and Dathanar act, which is once again really cool. Their dialogues are amazing. I can just imagine Steven Erikson having a ton of fun writing their dialogues because you can go so far overboard with that, because it's pure theatrics at that point. I love that. It's great. I'm having a lot of fun with that. But also there's a seriousness in there because you see how these different characters work with the Hust swords that are clearly insane. You see how underneath their bravado and theatrics and comedy and everything, Prazak and Dathanar are pretty tough bastards and pretty clever and know what they do, which is interesting because the way they're introduced, you don't realize that. We realize it a chapter 2 before when they kill the deserters, and you're like, holy shit, they're actually good fighters. And then you have Galabaris realize that yes, they are actually Anomander Rake's best Houseblade commanders underneath all of that. So there's that. We slowly get revealed that there is more than meets the eye on the first meeting, which is obviously something that we have seen before in a lot of ways with a lot of characters with Steven Erikson. That we have people that are comedic on the first look but have a lot of deeper qualities in there. But yeah, we have that scene when they take on the armor and through their comedic act and all of that take ease the strain and stress, and now everyone has their sword and armor, and all those Hust people are kind of coming together in a way as soldiers. I mean, they're still not perfect or anything, but things work out, and we have that scene with Pharaoh Hand and Dazak and Prazak and Dathanar when they are out at the fire and figuring out the whole how to work with the army, where you realize they're actually pretty fucking smart people as well, right? they are really smart and know exactly what to do underneath their overt, dramatic personality. So that was like interesting. It's also nice to see that finally someone actually figures out who is doing all these murders, even though it's obviously more than just her being Rance being just the murderer, but that idea with like two personalities in her, and one being the mage and the other one not. That's interesting to look at, and it'll be interesting to see how that will change once the ritual happens. But anyway, we see how Prezak and Dathanar actually manage to help the Hust Legion in a lot of ways. While Galabaris goes off to meet his lover and former commander to tell her about what happened to the wardens and maybe get her back into the fold of the Hust, whether that works or not. And we have their interaction that is also very, very interesting to see, because it obviously ends in sex, but that's not the main thing that makes it interesting. No, the point is the idea of dissolution once again, and depravity in a way, or moral, yeah, moral depravity is probably what you can call it in a way, and how she's using that as a weapon against herself, but also against Scalabaris, and how he is kind of willingly actually going into that. That's like a very interesting dynamic, like a complicated dynamic that I don't know how many of you have ever been in that. Well, obviously not in that kind of special situation. At that point where you do something where you know it's kind of wrong on a lot of levels, but you do it anyway, and you know both sides know it's kind of wrong. You do it for all the wrong reasons, whether it's something sexual or not, and like everyone does it basically just to hurt themselves, because there are these situations where hurting yourself is part of what you do on an emotional level. It's part of why, for example, you know, some people become alcoholics. The drinking part is like certainly part of that as well. Like the idea of like willfully sinking into self pity and self dissolution is a very tempting thing to do sometimes. I'm just saying. I can't recommend it. It's just something that people do sometimes, and I like the fact that Steven Erikson once again is like portraying all these themes that you see a lot of in. I mean, that relationship and that scene with Galabaris and, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting her name, which is a problem. The commander of the Hust Legion. Um, if you take away their roles and the setting of this being like some epic fantasy, if you take all of that away, you could transplant that entire dialogue and everything around it into like a current, like temporary literary fiction a book or short story. Sounds more like a short story actually, but you could totally translate that dynamic, because that's exactly what a lot of modern contemporary fiction explores, that like willingness of humans to be unhappy in life and perpetuate their unhappiness, because you know that's what we do as humans, because we, I don't know, are not a happy species with all the stuff that we have done to ourselves and our planet, which, you know, kind of comes back to what we said before. All right, so let's have a look at um, chapter 16. What's going on in House Drakens? Well, we see the growing and growing madness of, already beginning madness, or at least social issues and mental issues of Sanderlath Drukorlat, with her constantly confusing Rennek with Orphantal, which is obviously a problem. We also have more insane sisters, Envy and Spite. Although this is like something that I found really fascinating, because it kind of echoes something that we've seen in like the other way in The God Is Not Willing, and that being that Envy and Spite and Malice, but well, you know, she's dead. Envy and Spite are older than Arathan. I don't even know how much older than Arathan, but he doesn't know. And he seems much older now because they're growing so much slower, which is something that we've seen in The God Is Not Willing with Rant, right? Just the other way around. But but still, it's because Arathan is more like Rant than Envy and Spite are like Rant in a lot of ways. And he's the one who's unconscious about the both of them are Rant and Arathan are unconscious about the difference in aging speed, I would say. So we have that. We have what I personally really appreciated about the like about Anomander Rake or the portrayal of Anomander Rake here. Because I mean, I've said it before. I'm not a huge Anomander Rake fan, but what I really appreciated here is how brittle he comes across here in especially in that chapter. His like uncertainties. He's like how uncomfortable he is with the rise of magic. How insecure he is with all of these things. How he's basically using his like moral like his like iron adherence to morals and self-chosen laws and whatnot and rules as like a shield to deal with his uncertainty and insecurity at the world, the changing of the world mostly. That's something that I found interesting because like that's like the first time Anomander Rake comes across as like at least kind of showing weakness. So yeah, I that's like the first time I appreciated Anomander Rake's like being in a chapter, I would say. Um, so there's that. We then obviously have the full-on like Azathanai doing a Azathanai thing when Caladan Brood actually goes after Envy and Spite and takes apart the entirety of House Drakons that he built. Also, obviously, nice to have that like whole idea with the beginning of Forge of Darkness and the words in the Zathanai that were over the door, right? It said there will be peace, and it's like, well, I don't know. Tearing the whole place apart is very peaceful indeed. But anyway, we have that, lots of fireworks and everything. And then we come to like the really weird scene that really fucked me up last night, and luckily, I thought a bit about it. So I'm going to do something that is going to be make people like Niflrock tear their hair out because I'm going to speculate on stuff. So here's the thing. We have that scene when Sandaleth goes back into the town, into the house, to find Rennick, whom she believes is Orphantal because she's quite mad at this point. And she actually enters that forbidden room with the thing that was running around in there, which we have heard through mentions seems to be a Finnist. Luckily, 2 chapters ago we learned what a Finnist is through Coria Delat and Arathan, when they talked about the acorn, that being like the Finnist being a place where you store power or beings and whatnot. So we learned that whatever is running around in there seems to be a Finnist. So good so far. It seems to be Draconis's Finnist. That means Draconis has willingly taken a lot of his power and put it in there to not come across as like superpowered, I guess. Because apparently he's extremely powerful. I guess we know he's an Azathanai at this point. It seems pretty obvious, or even more than like an Azathanai, maybe like an Uber Azathanai or whatever that would be. I'm not into Dragon Ball, so I don't know how those these like stacking things up things work. But he's like extremely powerful apparently. So he takes all his power, drops it into his Finnist, locks that Finnist, which seems to be something like a double of his, into that room, runs around, and everyone thinks he's just a normal Teist, so he gets to get it on with with Mother Dark, and yeah, he's still powerful, but apparently not as powerful. And now that Finnist has taken up all the energy that Envy and Spite are taking out, all the emotional energy, is become like even darker, more brutal, and whatnot. It also kind of makes sense because you have like all the darkness and the coldness, and we know from like Malazan Book of the Fallen stuff that like the actual pure darkness is pretty fucking cold. So anyway, Sandaleth stumbles in there, and in whatever weird way, the thinnest of Draconis that looks like Draconis impregnates her in a magical way because she immediately gives birth to child after child after child, which kind of reminded me of that scene in Forge of Darkness when I keep forgetting who it was looked at that fountain or pool before Olar Ethiel killed the sergeant. It might have been the sergeant. I'm just like dumb. I also forgot his name, which sucks because it's disrespectful to characters. Anyway, it kind of like mirrors that scene with like her taking out one child, one stillbirth after the other, until she has a child, which is Corlat, and we all know Corlat. But the question is like, is the thinnest of the thinnest of Draconis their father now? Is she even actually the mother, or is she just a vessel in that point for something else? I don't know. It's weird. It's really weird, and but we now know where Sandalath, where Corlat comes from, and she's full of all the love of Draconis, who doesn't have any left at this point. Poor Draconis. So anyway, that was like quite the weird ending. We also see Olar Ethiel talking with Kaladin Brood. Kaladin Brood forcing Olar Ethiel to give back Rennek and Ivis, whom she maybe saved from the fire and maybe didn't, and then, tearing apart the house over envy and spite. So, yeah. There's that. We also get like an explanation for why envy and spite are so have that sibling rivalry when you have the idea that they're basically parts of the same person and thus have to like constantly work against each other while still relying on each other. But there's that. Anyway, Rennek takes Corlat, and that's sort of where we leave the entire thing. Book 2 is at an end. I have no idea where this will be going in book 3 and 4. I am looking forward to finding out, though. You can find it out with me on Monday, I guess. We'll see how and where that all is going. Yeah, until then, have a great weekend. I'll be going to a short film festival now and talk about short films about all kinds of interesting topics. Until then, cheers.